Welcome to Reach Church. I'm Marshall Fant, the Director of Church Consulting and Strategic Planning for Gospel Fellowship Association Missions. My purpose is to encourage pastors and church leaders as you refocus, renew, and revitalize your churches. We've established this podcast to offer practical tips and suggestions as you equip disciples to make disciples. It's Marshall Fant. Welcome back to GFA Missions Reach Church. Got a special edition today we're looking forward to. Jon Crocker, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you, sir, so much.
Yeah, this is really the last podcast of this season, so I couldn't think of a better way to wrap it up. This is, wanted this to be an encouraging time, really do, and the topic was really requested by a missionary. And really, we always appreciate feedback and ideas for topics, so be sure and send those in. Either if you're watching on YouTube or one of the podcast platforms, we always welcome the feedback. So thank you for that. But here's the topic that came in from missionary. The topic is, John, how can missionaries be the greatest blessing to those that support them? And I really appreciate that but I think of a pastor, I want to take the pastoral role. I want you to take the missionary role because I know we as churches want to be a blessing to our missionaries. So how can we be the greatest blessing? And that just struck me. And I think of Philemon says in verse 7, if we have great joy and consolation in your love because the hearts of the saints have been refreshed by you, brother. And so as we go through this, I want us just to think about the ways that we can be partners in ministry, both churches, church members, pastors, missionaries, because we just can go to our Jerusalem, but we support missionaries to take the gospel to the uttermost parts of the world.
Good.
So as we go through this, we just want to talk about some partners in ministry. It's a two-way relationship. So, John, why don't you just introduce really from the missionary side how you would like to start this, and then we'll get into kind of the two phases I see of the partnership.
Good. Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, I first of all, before I say anything about the topic itself, probably be helpful just to know, just to say out loud, I'm coming at this from the perspective of somebody. I love deputation. The Lord has given us a wonderful, wonderful network of supporters.
All right, can we pause a minute?
Yeah.
Because in case somebody's just tuning in for the first time and they got a topic in mission. So our background, your background, you're the new executive director for about a year now, right, at GFA Missions.
Right.
Your background, you were a missionary in Mexico City.
Right, 10 years.
So for full transparency, as I was a pastor, we supported you as a church. So we had a relationship, pastor to missionary, and now you're my boss. So now we have a different relationship, but it's all for the same goal.
Right.
So I just wanted to give them your background. Mexico City, deputation, Mexico City. GFA asked you to come be the executive director, and now you're filling this role. So now launch into I just want to give a little background.
That's helpful. Thank you. Thank you. It's probably good for everybody to know that we've known each other that long. So we just had a great experience on deputation. Our support network is just wonderful. Our supporters, both churches and individuals, are very faithful. They're very fervent. They take very, very good care of us as missionaries. Our experience has been great. So when I talk about this topic of the relationship between churches and missionaries, I'm coming at it from the perspective of someone who's had really, really great experiences. And I'm not speaking in terms of things that I wish that our churches would do for us. I'm speaking in terms of, hey, these are great experiences that the Lord has given us, and these might be helpful to other churches and missionaries as they seek to build these same kind of relationships and partnerships in ministry. And those are great words. You use those to start us off. Relationships, partnership, very important. Missionaries don't want to be a pin on a map.
Right.
Missionaries want to be a part of these ministries, these churches that are supporting them. Right. Just a pin on the map. There's nothing wrong with pins on the map. That's not what I'm saying. But just a pin on the map. Yeah. So, I think you looking through this and thinking through this topic some, I thought of 3 John, such a well-known text about these missionary partnerships, These are people that went out for the sake of the name. And that text is 3 John 8, tells the church that the church can be actually, those people can be fellow helpers, fellow workers for the truth. Amen. And so when we think about this topic, here are missionaries that are going out, and the people in the local church are not. They're staying here. But through these partnerships, through these relationships, those people in those local churches are actually participating in the ministry. They're actually helping in a very real and practical way. They're helping the fulfillment of the Great Commission in so many places around the world by partnering with these people who do go out for the sake of the name. They're fellow helpers for the truth. I think that's a very, very important concept. It's partnership relationship idea.
Yeah, and I think what struck me about this recommendation, again, the missionary asks, how can we be the greatest blessing to churches? So, again, that's the context, the encouragement, and it is a partnership. So let's just start with this. All right, so the first phase of any relationship with a missionary, with the local church, has to do really with getting to know each other. That's where we start. So this is, so during the deputation process or during the getting to know each other process, I think what we need to know from a missionary so we can be a blessing to you, because deputation is the model that we use at GFA, and most people in our circles use a deputation model. So some things that I just wrote down that helps us know you is really, just several things, and you can comment and then I'd like for you to respond. But really, what do you believe God is sending you to do? So what specifically, if we know that, and then really, how will this be carried out? How much monthly support are you going to need? Are you going to be part of a team? Now, we understand in certain restricted access nations, it may not be possible. So really, what I'm saying, what God is calling you to do, how can we be a blessing to you as you do this? And we want you to understand the process from our side is going to take some time. And we want to be a blessing to you because we really want to get to know you. At least our philosophy. And I think I share this with other pastors, that is a partnership that's going to be more than simply a come to one service or let's go eat a meal, or I think I love to start that way. But let's get to know you and your burden and how this works out. So now, with that being said, from the pastoral end, it's really me interviewing you. So I want you to pick it up from the missionary end of how during this time that we can be a blessing and encouragement to you.
Good. Okay, that's helpful. That's good. I guess you're talking about really all you're talking about is communication.
Exactly.
And you're talking about investing time up front that will build a strong relationship. I mean, when a missionary is on deputation, wants to go to the field, Lord willing, is going to be there as long as the Lord gives him life, as long as the Lord allows strength-wise, health-wise, family-wise, all those things. You're looking at initiating possibly a 30, 40, 50-year partnership. So it's all right to take time. It's probably really smart to take some time up front to really get to know one another. And that communication, as you mentioned, it is a two-way street.
Right.
It's not just from the church to the missionary. It's not just from the missionary to the church. So I guess just thinking in terms of what the missionary ought to provide to a church, I think every missionary ought to have ready several documents.
Okay.
You got to have your written out, your testimony of conversion, your and again, that would be for other family members. If you're married, both husband and wife have testimonies of conversion already written out. Maybe a simple doctrinal statement. Maybe a
now, not so much your ordination statement.
Right. Something simple.
Statement of faith. Right.
Right. Exactly. A simple doctrinal statement. Maybe just an explanation of how the Lord has called you and led you to the particular field, the particular ministry you're going to have. Have all that written out, and just be ready to provide that to churches. And I think a church is wise to request that kind of thing ahead of time. And I think a missionary ought to have it ready. That allows the church to get to know the missionary, at least on a surface level. You want to have written out your ministry plan for your first term. A lot of that's, you got to be flexible. We understand that. But you know if you're going to a certain place and you know the language is particularly difficult, you're probably going to need 2 years. You're not going to do a lot of ministry. You're going to you're going to spend most of your time working on language. And you just have all those kinds of things written out, and so you can share that with the church up front. That'll help the church know you before even extending an invitation to come for a meeting. I think that'd be helpful. All
right, so someone that's not familiar with our terminology in missions,
sure.
When you say first term,
good.
Would you explain that?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. A lot of times the idea of a term would be between furloughs, between your times in the States. So missionary goes on deputation, raises support to go to the field. That's that terminology. Deputation is the time in the States, raising support. You go to the field. You're going to be there for a number of years, 2, 4, 5, 6 years. Some are a little bit longer, some are a little bit shorter, depending on what kind of ministry. But then the missionary will come back on furlough, spend some time visiting, supporting churches, just sharing what the Lord is doing. It's a time of rest a lot of times for missionary family, or it should be, a time for just really some spiritual renewal, refocusing. It gives the missionary some time to really focus on their own heart needs, their own spiritual needs and family needs, and really have a time to really recharge. That's furlough.
Right.
And then just speaking from the missionary perspective, a lot of times that is a helpful, very helpful time for the ministry on the field, because it actually obligates the people in these ministries. If the Lord is raising up a local church there, the missionary pulls away for a time. That's hard. There are challenges. There are some discouragements, but it actually forces the people on the field, forces the people in those ministries to step up a little bit
and do the work of the ministry.
And do the work of the ministry. So I'm in favor of reasonable furloughs for sure, for that reason as well.
All right. So now at this phase we're talking about, though, you're on deputation. We're trying to be a blessing to you. You're trying to be a blessing to our church. And a lot of this is communication. So you said documents, testimonies, statement of faith. What else? What else can a church? What else to be a blessing? What else does the church need to know during that stage?
What does the church need to know? Well, I think a church is trying to figure out whether this is the kind of ministry partnership that they want to enter into as well. So the missionaries raising support, right? That's one of the things missionaries doing.
Right.
It's not the main focus. Hope we'll get to talk about that a little bit later. But the missionary is traveling in the United States because he or she or they want to go to a foreign field and preach the gospel. That's why they're doing this.
Right.
So they're communicating with a lot of churches. They're visiting a lot of different places. They're making a lot of contacts and a lot of phone calls and looking for a lot of places to go and share their burden for ministry. But a church needs to be thinking as well. If the missionary is going to be a blessing to that church, the church needs to make clear some things as well to see if this is the kind of partnership that they want to enter into. And that would actually allow the missionary to minister to the church in the most effective way possible.
And when you're doing that, then you feel like you are being a blessing.
Right. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly. So if the church, I just thinking a little bit from the church perspective, if the church has a written missions policy, if the church requires their missionaries to subscribe to a doctrinal statement,
right,
all those kinds of things. That just, if you've got a retirement policy, if there's a certain expectation that at a certain age we'll start curtailing your support some or end it altogether, all those kinds of things, if the church communicates that kind of thing with the missionary ahead of time, it'll actually allow the missionary to serve that church even more effectively. You just get all that in that initial communication before that relationship is even initiated. And that's just that communication is so helpful to both sides.
Yeah. So let's go back to the pastoral side, because I'll say this.
Yeah.
So I think for our pastors and missions committee who are doing it, if you don't have a written mission statement, you need one. I mean, missions policy, you need one. So you know what to expect and they know what to expect. Okay. Now, Jon, you made this statement. You made the statement that you want the church is to know you're not I know you're raising funds, but you're not primarily raising funds.
Yep.
All right, so help me understand what you mean by that.
Okay, good. Well, if I can for just a moment, I'll speak specifically for GFA missionaries, though I know this will be true of a lot of missionaries, probably most missionaries from other really good boards as well. So, but I know this for GFA missionaries. I am certain that our missionaries want churches to know that they are not primarily raising funds. Our missionaries want churches to know that they are visiting there to serve and encourage that church. I know that's the attitude of GFA missionaries. I've heard that from so many of our recent deputies from the last few years. That's what they're. That's what they're.
Wait a minute. What is a deputy?
Deputy, somebody on deputation.
There you go.
All right. Sorry.
Nope.
So I hear that from our missionaries that are out on deputation. Their desire is to visit these churches and serve and encourage those ministries and help them in their own efforts at seeing the Church of Christ built up by His power and by His blessing. And they're the jokes, right? The fun, missionaries and mercenaries, and that's in good fun. That's fine, no problem there. But I know this for a fact that our missionaries are convinced that God has called them, that the Lord of the harvest is sending them out, and they know. If that's the case, funds are not going to be a problem.
Right.
So that's not their focus. Like if the Lord of the harvest is sending them out, He's going to connect them with the right churches. He's going to move in the churches that are going to partner with them and help them get to the field and to support them on the field. So what they're wanting to do, they're wanting to go in to these churches and be a blessing, be an encouragement, different parts of the body of Christ, and really serve in whatever way they can. And if I could just say something, I think it'd be really helpful if the churches would look at missionaries that way. Don't think of these missionaries, and hopefully this is the case of missionaries that are visiting your churches. Look at these missionaries as people that are wanting to serve and know your congregation and really enjoy fellowship and get to know the people and actually participate in some ways in what the Lord is doing in that congregation, in that place for a period of time. And that knits people together. If you're thinking about building a relationship, that knits people's hearts together when they serve shoulder to shoulder. If it's for a week, 10 days, 4 or 5 days, let the missionary, invite the missionary, maybe require the missionary to be involved in a few different ministries through the week in the life of your church. And that actually does knit the hearts of the people and the missionary together.
All right, so this is what I hear you saying. When you go into a church, you want your family to be integrated as much as possible into the normal activities of that church. And I think some churches, some lay people may have the idea, okay, this is a missionary, they're a special saint, they, I really can't relate or whatever. But you're coming in to serve and encourage.
Right.
So I want just to for our pastors, maybe if you could, if I as a pastor can encourage our people to do that when a missionary comes. Because we know I think if we view it properly, we know you're traveling. Most missionaries have children, and that puts a strain on relationships, and we don't expect you to be the perfect family. But at the same time, I think we need to know that you want to get to know people.
Right.
Good.
Absolutely. And I could just add to that, it's you get to know people, you're in people's homes, you're in different activities in the church. I just remember when I was on deputation, right? I love to preach, right? I love to preach. When I was on deputation, our hearts were passionate about sharing what we believe the Lord was sending to us to do. We got to talk about that. We got to do those things in all the churches we visited. But it was really when we had an opportunity to slow down a little bit and participate in other ministries where we're not just up front on the platform sharing publicly, but we're participating in things like VBSs and different kinds of outreaches, and we're doing that with the church. And then here's this opportunity to share publicly what the Lord is doing. There's more context, there's more of a relationship, and that kind of outlook on things that churches can use missionaries in this way, not only to to share their own burden, but also just to be a part of that congregation for a while. That's one of the great thrills of deputation. You get to see so many different parts of the body of Christ. You get to see, you get to know Christians from many different places and just build those friendships that are so valuable, and they're long lasting when you spend more time investing in them up front like that.
Sure. And imagine you still have families outside. I mean, families in the church that still communicate with you all.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So let's talk about one last thing on this phase. And we're kind of setting an expectation here. As you're spending time with people and you are encouraging and serving, there's also the aspect, the reality is that as you're setting out and you're presenting your burden, okay, that is what you believe God's calling you to do, but that could change, right, due to things outside your control or in God's sovereign direction.
Right.
You want to comment on that?
Sure. I think it's helpful. I mean, this would be true in the U.S. as well. Like we can't, isn't this right? We can't see the future.
No.
Right.
No.
And just like a church that sets out, this is our goal for 2023. This is our goal for 2024. These are the things we want to see the Lord do in our own congregation. Missionaries set those kinds of goals. They've got their ministry plan, but missionaries have to be flexible, just like anybody in ministry, and anybody has to be flexible. We can't see the future, so things change.
Right.
And you get to the field and things don't turn out always exactly like you're anticipating. And when you have a ministry relationship with somebody, you're willing to flex as God as God changes their plans, as God redirects them into different kinds of ministries, to different kinds of outreaches, different kinds of emphases. If you have a relationship, your natural bent is going to be to help those missionaries through those kinds of transitions, through those kinds of changes, because it's not just based on this missionary came one day, preached, showed a video, we started supporting them, but we really don't know them. It's a lot harder to flex when it's that kind of relationship. So I think it's just an encouragement to really be thinking. If we have a relationship with these people, the deeper relationship we can have, the more we will be able to minister to those missionaries and help them as they go through changes, as God changes their direction, as God changes their plans. So that flexibility, missionaries have to have it. And when churches really support their missionaries through those kinds of ministry changes, it's just such an encouragement, strengthening through those really often very difficult times.
All right, so now before we shift into phase two, just two phases, the deputation, how we can be a blessing to missionaries, how that missionary can be a blessing to us, and then we're going into once we commit to a relationship.
Okay.
In other words, the church says, okay, we want to partner with the Crockers, we want to partner with whoever, and we want to be a part of your ministry. We agree. All right, is there anything else on that stage before we get there you want to say, either to the missionary or to the church, or anything else you want to say there?
Yeah, I guess I would say to both parties there. One of the great benefits of deputation is it exposes churches to what God is doing in the world. And people talk a lot about just changing deputation or figuring out a way to get rid of it. And I'm not in favor of that. I think if you lose deputation, you lose this stream of people coming through the churches that are saying, hey, lift up your eyes to the field. This is what God is doing in the world. And I would just encourage missionaries to think that way, but I would also encourage churches to think that way. Here's a way you can use missionaries on deputation. When they come into your church, here's an opportunity for your church to look at what God is doing in another part of the world, look at how Christ is building his church. And what that does for a church, it's actually stirring and really motivating to people. And, when Christ lifts our eyes to the fields, we become excited about what he's doing to build his church in another place altogether.
Right.
what happens in us here in our local church, we actually end up wanting to be more involved. We're more fervent in prayer. We're wanting to evangelize right here in our own community. And I think when we have this emphasis of a missionary coming in and really pushing on us these wonderful things that God is doing in the world today, it stirs the churches to give themselves more to what Christ is doing to build his church. And it's great. And just one more thing there. This is actually a way that God does call laborers into the harvest. And I think so many missionaries today in 2023 and in my generation will point back to very specific moments in their lives when they heard a missionary challenge. They heard a missionary that was on deputation or a missionary that was on furlough, sharing what the Lord was doing in the world. And that was the moment, or one of the moments, when God really began stirring about ministry, about missions. And so I think this is the way we need to think about this. Obviously they need funds, right? But let's just take that off the table. God's going to do that. God's going to move in churches. God will provide the funds through his people. That's going to happen, right? Let's take that off the table and say, hey, here's an opportunity for a missionary that's very burdened for a part of the world and whom God is working, God is using. Here's an opportunity for us to hear and have our own hearts challenged and stirred. And what will happen in a church, that actually creates excitement about the Great Commission, excitement about being involved right there in your own communities, but then actually through that, God can stir and raise up pastors, raise up missionaries for a new generation.
I agree. And just as a personal testimony, my wife and I were married in 1981, and we were so burdened as missionaries came through that we would set aside that week, our missions conference week, as a special week of prayer together. Are we where God wants us to be? And so what I'm saying is what you just said, we were moved by that. And I truly believe that we are where we are in ministry today because of missions conferences. Wow. And the way God used missionaries in our heart and in our lives, and really to stir, because I knew they came with a passion. Right. And Lord, I need that passion in my life. And am I where I need to be? So we still to this day set aside that great. Week. So that's great. Just a personal testimony. How God used that. That's great. Lives.
Very good.
All right.
Amen.
All right. So once a church commits to relationship, okay, again, the goal is, all right, so now we're supporting you, and as a pastor, we want to be a blessing to you. So I just want to bring a couple of things, just want you to respond to it. So how can a church supporting the Crockers, how can we communicate to you without overloading you with things happening in our church? Because it's that partnership. So what are just a couple of things that we can be a blessing and not a burden to you?
Yeah. Could I just say one thing? You've said a couple times now this church is supporting the Crockers. We are not raising support.
No,
I just want to make that. I just want to make that real clear.
Sorry. Any missionary that comes through.
Right. Yeah. I know you're
personalizing.
I got it. I know you're using it as if. I just want to make that clear. We're not raising support. So thank you. So, again, speaking really personally, and I think this will be true of most missionaries, it actually really, really is a great, great blessing to receive communications from our supporting churches.
Okay.
Right. We remember very, very well our visits with those people. We know these people. And so when we see a little newsletter, some piece of information, a lot of times we know the people that are going through that. We know the people that are in that prayer request. We know the people that, maybe these two people are getting married. Well, I remember them. I remember them from, and that it's great because it fosters that sense of connection.
Okay.
And really maintains that relationship fresh and real. Now, like you said, if a missionary's got couple dozen supporting churches, and a lot of missionaries have more than that, that can become overwhelming. So I guess my recommendation would be, share periodically with missionaries, maybe once a quarter, maybe once a week, but make it clear, right? We don't expect any response from this.
Yeah.
We're not gonna hold you accountable for what was in what we put in those announcements.
Yeah.
And then that way, if a missionary is going through a really busy season, and he just doesn't have time to read that week or during that month, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
Don't have expectations. But I think a lot of missionaries do really appreciate having that sense of connection with their supporting churches that's ongoing. And not just when they come back to the U.S. for visits. So I would say come up with a way, whether it's quarterly or monthly, just to share a little bit about what's happening in the churches, what's happening in your church, and share that with the missionaries, but without any kind of expectation or obligation to interact and start a longer conversation.
Good. So, that's well said. Thank you. Very helpful. All right. Secondly, so how can we best, what have you found? Okay, we want to be a blessing to you. So what have you found the best way we can communicate your prayer needs to our congregation?
Good.
Okay,
Good.
so how what have you seen most encouraging to you?
Yeah. Well, I think there are different ways, and it probably depends on the church.
Right.
Probably depends on.
Here's what I'm fighting
Go ahead.
against.
Yeah.
All right, so we get, you email your prayer letter, all right, and then it's just forwarded to everybody in the church. Okay, right. And then another one, and then another one. So that's where I'm fighting that. Okay, so that I should have said that in the beginning.
Yeah. Okay.
All
Okay.
Right. That makes sense?
You. Yeah. It does. It does. I think. Again, depending on the church, depending on how many missionaries the church supports.
Yeah.
There's got to be some flexibility here. There's probably not like a one size fits all for how to do this well. It really depends on the church. My recommendation would be make those letters accessible to the people in some way. That way, if somebody in the church wants to get every single letter,
they can get it.
And there are people in our churches that do that. That's great. But I think if we're thinking of your question in terms of how to maintain that relationship, then I think a good way would be have people in the church involved in this. Like, hey, you for this year, you take this missionary, and when we get a prayer letter from them, you distill that prayer letter into 3 or 4 or 5 bullet points about what's going on, a couple of praises, few prayer requests, and we'll rotate those. We'll produce something every month that kind of gives that little synopsis of what's happening in our missionaries' lives and ministries. And you're asking people in the church to do that. And what that does is it just deepens that relationship and that sense of connection, because then if a church gets a letter from a missionary and just forwards that to everybody, the missionary doesn't know about that.
No.
The missionary is benefiting from that prayer. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm saying that in terms of fostering this relationship, if there's somebody that kind of adopts a missionary for a year, and communicates with that missionary on a regular, every 4 to 6 weeks, and is in charge in that church of sharing requests from that missionary, that's a great way to build the relationship, and then also share these current requests with the whole congregation in a good, efficient, but clear way.
In a personal way.
Yeah, right.
Because you got that contact.
Right,
so
exactly.
kind of the old adopt a missionary.
Right. It's similar. Yeah.
That's good. Good.
Yeah.
All right. One more. All right. So with technology. All right. So I know now, let me say this. I know not all missionaries have the access
right.
to high-speed internet. So I understand that. But like a Zoom call, is that something that's a nuisance, or is that something that is a blessing? So as a church does this, I know that, so I'm asking you to speak broadly, maybe just not your personal opinion. Well, how have you found missionaries responding to that?
Generally well.
Okay.
If this is a supporting church that is again really trying to maintain a relationship, this is not pulpit supply.
Right.
This is not. It's fine if that is actually what the missionary is doing on a given Sunday, but let that be in a context of relationship and conversation. And I think missionaries are positive about that, generally speaking.
Okay. But
I would encourage churches to manage expectations about that, and not be too strict on that, because you've got issues like time zones, ministry schedules. I mean, there are so many housing.
Yeah.
It might just, they might be serving in a place, and their housing situation is such where that's just so difficult when you throw in the schedule differences and all that stuff. So that's a great thing to explore, and it could be really, really helpful. But it just doesn't work for everybody.
You hit the key, time zones. Because I know some Zoom calls, they want the whole missionary family. It's the middle of the night and the kids are asleep. So you hit what I was trying to get at there as far as expectations. Okay, so we're really out of time. But I do want to say this, and I want to let you to wrap it up. GFA has missionary roundtables, and for those who are not aware, you can find them online. And we have you covered one on the deputation model. I just want to make sure that will be in the show notes, so those that are looking can find. It's about an hour and 30 minutes, something like that. But it's a great discussion on why deputation, the deputation model.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure. So anyway, all right. So I'll let you wrap it up.
Yeah.
Again, the whole context. We want to be a blessing to you, and the missionary wants to be a blessing to the church. All right. So John, just take you close it out.
Yeah. Good. Maybe could I say one word about that roundtable real fast? All right.
Yeah.
I would really encourage people to go look that up, and like Dr. Fant said, we'll have the link there in the show notes. But that was a roundtable we had with 4 panelists. The title of the session was actually the deputation model, and then the question, is it broken?
Yeah.
That's what a lot of people are saying. And so what we did is we just heard from the missionaries' perspectives, just a lot of the things that we've mentioned today, really. And it actually ends up magnifying the value of the deputation model, but also giving some ways that it could be improved, could be refined.
Sure.
But it was a really, really encouraging discussion we had. That was in December, and I'd encourage anybody to go look that up on YouTube.
December
and watch that.
2022.
December 2022. Yeah. Thank you. Good. Well, thank you. Yeah. So I would just go back to what we said at the beginning, right? This is a relationship. This is a partnership, and there are obviously responsibilities for both parties, but there are also huge benefits for both parties.
Exactly.
And I think if missionaries and churches can both think of that word, let's not think primarily funds or support, just think relationship. And then the church, the missionaries thinking, I get to go out and represent all these people that are my relationship network. They can't go to where I'm going, but I am actually helping them obey Christ's command to make disciples of all nations. Right? They're doing that through me, and that's a great privilege. It's a great joy. It's very stirring and satisfying. Really, to God's glory to think that way, and then the church can think the same way. Here we can't go. But here's somebody that we're kind of adopting as part of our family, adopting as part of our part of the body of Christ. And we are actually being fellow helpers with the truth by helping these people and upholding them, and so they can go out and preach the gospel and make disciples and see Christ continue to build up his church. You have that kind of culture in a church, and you have that kind of attitude as a missionary. And when these kinds of relationships begin to be explored and formed, it actually ends up having a cascading effect, especially in the church, where you end up having this culture where missions is actually something, the Great Commission is actually something to aspire to. It's a great privilege, a great joy. And when you have this kind of emphasis, that's when God stirs in churches and people are more involved, and God calls more laborers when that kind of culture and attitude is developed within a congregation. So
very well said. So thank you for your time.
Well, thank you.
I love what you said. We want to serve and encourage you, and I think you said the goal of missionaries to serve and encourage the church.
Amen.
If we have that relationship, we will refresh each other.
Amen. Great.
Okay, for our listeners and watchers, thank you so much. This wraps up this season of another podcast. And we're just so thankful. Thanks for GFA. So thanks for your support of the podcast as we seek to, honor Christ as he builds his church. And thanks to, again, all the support staff here in the office. They do a wonderful job in setting all this up. And really, we're very thankful. Also, Harvest Baptist Church in Rock Hill, they do sponsor this, help us each month. And so we're very thankful for all of that.
A lot of people to thank, like you said, and ultimately the Lord is the one that allows this, and he's used it. I travel some, and I get comments about this podcast, so the Lord is using it. And I just want to say thanks to Dr. Fant for really leadership over this project, and the Lord has used it and is using it. So thank you for your ministry.
Yeah, and we look forward to the fall.
Very good.
We look forward to launch it in the fall, so we're not going away.
That's right.
Lord willing. So look forward to exciting. So we're going to try to do a series next fall if it all comes together. And if not, we'll just keep going like we are.
That's good. That sounds
all right,
great.
John, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, bye now.
You're listening to Rechurch, a podcast of Gospel Fellowship Association Missions. If you would like more information about our ministry or how we may assist you and your church, visit us at gfamissions.org/consulting.